The Houston Texans offseason has us talking about the offensive line at the guard spot a ton. A couple of new faces in. Shaq Mason and Kenyon Green out. Obviously, the trade of Laremy Tunsil has us having a conversation about Blake Fisher, Titus Howard. Who's the left tackle? Who's the right tackle? Those are your on-roster options. But we haven't talked a ton about the center position. Scruggs, Jarrett Patterson, or someone not on the roster. Let's talk about it here on the YouTube channel. So Scruggs, Jarrett Patterson, those are the two on-roster options that the Texans have at center, and both of them played center last year for the Houston Texans. Scruggs started the season as the center, had a little hiccup there in week 2 where he didn't play. Patterson filled in for him. And then Scruggs was the center until they had to put him over at left guard. At that point, they inserted Jarrett Patterson in at the center spot. He was the starter yet again after being a starter at center in 2023. So let's talk first about Scruggs. This is a second-round pick that Nick Caserio traded up for in the 2023 NFL Draft. Coming out of the 2023 NFL Draft, Nick Caserio probably felt like he had his offensive line solved with Tunsil and Howard at tackles, with Mason and Green at guards, and then Scruggs at center. And Scruggs played pretty darn well in the preseason, if you remember, and was going to be the starter at center heading into that year. But he got hurt, which is a thing that happens a lot with Scruggs. He got hurt. He didn't come back for a very long time. And when he came back, they needed to play him at guard. And he was just okay at guard. He finally got the center opportunity, unquestioned, unchallenged center heading into 2024, and he was pretty okay. I won't tell you that he was bad, but he certainly wasn't good. He was right around average at the center position, but yet again, injuries reared their ugly head with Scruggs. Jarrett Patterson got in there, and by the time Scruggs was healthy again, well, you get Scruggs at left guard. He played a little right guard as well, and he's not particularly good at guard. Nick Caserio said as much. He said as much in the bye week where he said Scruggs is a much better center than he is guard. Ironically, the guy that replaced Scruggs, the best snaps of the season for Jarrett Patterson was when he played left guard for the benched Kenyon Green before he suffered a concussion. Now let's talk about Patterson. Patterson, okay at the guard, okay at the center position. He was fine, all right? Not great, not bad. Pass blocking got a little bit better with Patterson in there when they first inserted him in there to the center spot and moved Scruggs around on that offensive line. And he was okay as a rookie. Actually probably played better than most people thought for a guy that was such a late round investment. Patterson was a guy the Texans drafted late in the 2023 NFL draft, and he ended up having to start because of injuries and played pretty well until he himself got injured. Patterson also had a concussion in 2024, so durability is certainly a concern with both of these guys, and neither one has locked down the position at center. Now, with the lack of bodies brought in that play center, it does feel like the Texans are indeed going to go about having Scruggs and Jarrett Patterson battle it out for the center spot, and perhaps the loser of that finds himself in a battle for some opportunities at guard if they aren't the starting center. But if the Texans wanted to add to the equation, there's some names to think about. And again, they haven't added anybody of extreme note to this offensive line. Laken Tomlinson from the Seattle Seahawks, that doesn't do a whole lot for you. And the guard that they traded for from the Minnesota Vikings, it kind of feels like purple Kenyon Green is kind of the way I would describe him. Ed Ingram, a higher draft pick, second round. Green was a first rounder. Just never really was solid enough for the Vikings, and they've moved on after benching him last year, but haven't added any centers to the equation. And there's been some centers come off the board in free agency, but the free agency market now is a little dire, a little disgusting, actually. There's nobody in free agency I'd want them to bring in and compete right away with Scruggs or Jarrett Patterson, unless it's a guy that Nick Caserio, offensive coordinator Nick Caley, and offensive line coach Cole Popovich are familiar with. How about David Andrews, 8-time captain for the New England Patriots, a former undrafted free agent who played his way into a starting role, and he was a guy that they trusted a ton at the center position. They had even other guys there in case Andrews didn't go, which he got hurt a little bit, but ultimately he had been the stalwart, the tent pole in that New England Patriots offensive line. Now, last year wasn't the best year for Andrews. It was a bad offensive line overall for the New England Patriots, one of the worst in football, and he's got shoulder surgery, and as Mike Reese here mentions, he's probably contemplating retirement. But if David Andrews wants to keep giving it a go, if David Andrews wants to continue to play football, well, how about with his old front office buddy, who's now general manager, Nick Caserio, his old offensive line coach, Cole Popovich, and a guy that also was on the coaching staff of Nick Caley? Wouldn't that be an opportunity that maybe Andrews would be interested in? Maybe the Texans would be interested in Andrews. Now, look, he's an older player, and again, might contemplate retirement. I don't love players that are thinking about retiring, trying to get them in for one last shot. And maybe, just maybe, Cole Popovich has the one voice there in that offensive line room, some improved cohesion across the offensive line and a new blocking scheme from Nick Caley. Maybe that's enough for Jarrett Patterson or Juice Scruggs to solidify that center position. But Andrews, we know with the track record and the success that he had in New England, he can play if Andrews still wants to play. Now, that's a guy who, hey, the Patriots are moving on. They want to get a new era and a little bit older player, expensive player. That's a player that's available because he's older, coming off an injury and expensive. This is a player who's available that I'm going to bring up, who's available because he just never quite got it for his previous team. Former first-round pick Garrett Bradbury. When they tell you they're a former first-round pick, usually means the player's been disappointing up to this point. But the Vikings signed former Colts center Ryan Kelly, making Bradbury a expendable piece. They're going to try to trade him ultimately. When you say that, they're looking for like a 7th-round pick to get him, but they're probably going to have to release Bradbury. And Bradbury is a guy that was on the radar a couple of years ago. If you were thinking about it, he ultimately stuck around with Minnesota, but it wasn't good for Minnesota. And I think with Bradbury not being good enough in a sister offense, an offshoot offense, like Kevin O'Connell, who, of course, coached under Sean McVay. Nick Caley previously coached under Sean McVay. I think with Bradbury maybe struggling in that situation, the Texans would have a modest interest at best. Again, struggling in a sister or an offshoot style of the offense that perhaps Nick Caley wants to run might not set well, but Bradbury's more experienced than Patterson and Scruggs, and he's not an old player like David Andrews. The Texans want to kick the tires at the right price. Be my guest. It'd be an intriguing ad. He doesn't necessarily come in with the for sure starting center job, but Juice Scruggs and Jarrett Patterson could use a little bit more competition than just the two of them. Plus, if you felt like one of those guys could hold down a guard spot, I'd lean a little bit more towards Patterson than Scruggs. If you felt like one of those guys could hold down a guard spot, maybe it's Scruggs versus, say, Bradbury, and then Patterson's competing for one of the guard spots. Or it's Patterson versus Bradbury and Scruggs is competing for a guard spot. There's options there if they brought in Bradbury. Ultimately, the best thing that can happen for the Texans is, well, Juice Scruggs or Jarrett Patterson emerges. And probably the best thing for the Texans is Juice Scruggs emerges as the center, emerges as the guy you can count on, emerges as the guy in the middle of that offensive line, and the cohesion of the 5 players helps him continue to improve at the center position after just actually limited snaps overall in his 2 seasons with the Texans at the center spot. And then you have Patterson, who is a steady, reliable backup not only at center, but they clearly felt comfortable enough to put Patterson in at guard last year when they initially benched Kenyon Green. Now, they had to go right back to Green when Patterson got a concussion, but they clearly feel comfortable with Patterson at guard to an extent. So Patterson as a backup, Scruggs, if he could wrestle it away from Patterson, that'd be ideal. But don't sleep on the idea of Bradbury or Old Man Andrews, because the Texans brass is familiar with him. It's not the worst idea. It's not the best idea, which is probably how we've kind of talked about all of the offensive line situations until the NFL draft gets here. And oh man, there are some guards, there's some interior linemen. Hell, there's even some tackles that you might like when the draft gets here, but it's still a ways away. So we won't spend too much time talking and dreaming about Alabama guard Tyler Booker, who's considered the Will Anderson of the offense at Alabama. We won't dream too much about Jonah Savanaia from Arizona, big, nasty mauler from America Samoa. We won't think too much about the majestic glory that is Tate Ratledge's mullet and mustache combination after his 3 really impressive seasons for the Georgia Bulldogs. We won't think about that just yet. We're still thinking about Juice Scruggs, Jarrett Patterson figuring out that center spot, maybe a veteran, some guards to kind of solidify next to them. And man, if you could figure out just the center guard situation for, say, 2-3 seasons with guys that you have here and guys that you add over the course of this offseason, go a long way into really calming things down as you get into big money for CJ Stroud, Will Anderson, and plenty of other players. What say you? You interested in these free agents? Or am I scraping the bottom of the barrel here, and it's really just up to Patterson and Scruggs to figure this out? Let me know in the comment section down below. On your way down there, throw me a thumbs up on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Don't miss out on SNL, myself and Landry Locker from the Locker Room. And don't miss Friday's show, okay? If you're watching this on Thursday, tomorrow. If you're watching this Friday early, later today, Friday, I got a mock draft for you. I got food reviews from the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. It's going to be a blast. We'll talk all about it on Friday. I appreciate you watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. Can't wait till we talk Texans again soon.